What if the reason you feel torn between your desire and your shame isn't because something is wrong with you, but because something within you has been exiled for too long? According to Carl Jung, every human being carries a shadow, a hidden part of the psyche made up of the thoughts, impulses, and emotions we deny, repress, or are too afraid to acknowledge. But few shadows are as deeply buried or as misunderstood as the sexual shadow. You see, your sexual energy isn't just about physical desire. It's symbolic. It carries with it unprocessed wounds, unmet needs, and disowned parts of your soul. And when left in the dark, it doesn't just disappear. It begins to control your life from behind the scenes, sabotaging your relationships, distorting your self-picture, keeping you trapped in cycles of guilt, fantasy, and confusion. In this powerful exploration, we will uncover the truth Carl Jung pointed to, that your sexual shadow is not your enemy, it is your invitation. An invitation to integration, to truth, and to reclaiming the vitality that's been locked behind shame. This is the truth most people are too afraid to face. But it's the only one that will ever set you free. There is something most people are terrified to admit, even to themselves, that their sexual impulses are not simply urges to be managed, silenced, or hidden away. They are raw expressions of the life force itself. But because of fear, because of societal conditioning, and because of centuries of religious and cultural repression, that energy has been pushed down into the unconscious, where it becomes something far more dangerous. You see, when you deny your own instincts, when you exile parts of yourself into the shadows, they do not vanish. They grow teeth. They mutate. They become distorted echoes of what they once were. What could have been creative becomes compulsive. What could have been intimate becomes secretive. And what could have been liberating becomes enslaving. This is the paradox of the sexual shadow. It is not evil. It is not shameful. It is powerful. And like all power, it becomes destructive when it is denied. The more you pretend it doesn't exist, the more control it has over your life. And that is the quiet tragedy of so many people. They think they are free because they've suppressed their impulses. They think morality lies in what they resist. But repression is not virtue. It is fear masquerading as discipline. It is a fragile cage built around a wild, beautiful animal that was never meant to be caged. Look closely, and you will see how this hidden energy shows up in your life, in the things you compulsively seek, in the relationships you sabotage, in the fantasies you feel ashamed of, in the parts of yourself you've never spoken out loud. You may think these urges are coming from outside you, but they're not. They're the voice of a part of you that has been ignored for too long, a part that is tired of being imprisoned, a part that only wants to be seen without judgment, without punishment. This part of you is not evil. It is ancient. It is sacred. It is the fire of transformation and intimacy, not the poison of corruption. But when denied, that fire will burn everything you try to protect. It will erupt in secrecy. It will speak in addiction. It will haunt your dreams, your relationships, your very sense of identity, and you will not know why. You will believe you are broken. You will believe you are sinful. But the truth is simpler and more painful. You are disconnected from yourself. The world taught you that to be good, you must be clean. But real purity is not the absence of desire, it is the integration of it. It is the courage to hold your darkness without being consumed by it. It is the wisdom to listen to your shadow without obeying its every demand. And it begins not with action, but with recognition. The moment you say, "Yes, this too is me," is the moment the war inside you begins to end. You cannot heal what you will not face. You cannot be whole while rejecting the parts of you that carry the most energy, the most truth. And sexuality is not merely a physical phenomenon. It is a psychological and spiritual one. It is symbolic, it speaks in metaphor. It carries your fears, your longing for connection, your wounds around intimacy, and your unspoken hunger for unity. And when you lock all that away in the unconscious, you don't just lose control, you lose the possibility of depth, of meaning, of transformation. To bring the sexual shadow into the light is not to indulge it, but to understand it, to ask it, what are you really saying? What do you really want? Not in the way of the ego, but in the way of the soul. You must listen without flinching. You must resist the urge to label it good or bad, right or wrong. You must see it as a mirror of your wholeness, not as a threat to your morality. What you are ashamed of may be the very doorway to your healing. What you hide may be what will free you. What you fear in yourself may be the most honest part of you, and until you are brave enough to face that part, to hold it, to give it voice, you will live in fragments. You will never fully arrive in your own life, and that is the true tragedy. Not that you have a shadow, but that you never learned how to dance with it. This is where true freedom begins. As children, we do not begin life with shame. We arrive whole, curious, alive, unafraid of our bodies, unafraid of sensation, unafraid of the deep instinctual rhythm that pulses through us. But very early, that natural freedom is interrupted. We begin to receive messages, subtle or direct, about what is acceptable and what is not. We are praised for some expressions and punished, ignored, or humiliated for others. And among the first parts of ourselves to be exiled is our sexuality. Not because it is wrong, but because it makes others uncomfortable. Because it reminds them of the very parts they've buried within themselves. So the child learns quickly. They learn to disconnect from the body, to flinch at the feeling of pleasure, to suppress the urge to explore. They learn that some parts of them are bad, not because they are harmful, but because they make others ashamed. And in the child's mind, this shame becomes a secret law. If I want to be loved, I must hide who I am. From this moment, repression begins, and what was once innocent becomes charged with guilt. The natural becomes unnatural, the sacred becomes sinful. This is how the sexual shadow is born, not from perversion, but from rejection, not from wickedness, but from a wound. And that wound, carried silently into adulthood, creates a split between your outer identity and your inner truth. You become two people, one who behaves, performs, and conforms, and one who hides, watches, and aches. The more you try to live as the first, the louder the second becomes, and you don't even realize it's your own voice calling out from the basement of your being. You may wonder why you feel conflicted in relationships, why intimacy feels dangerous, why you can't trust yourself fully when desire arises. It is because there is a forgotten child inside you who was told their natural instincts made them dirty. And that message has never been questioned. It has never been brought into the light. It still lives inside you, guiding your choices from the shadows. You were never broken. You were never impure. You were simply misled by a society that feared what it did not understand. A society that reduced sexuality to sin or performance, instead of honoring it as a powerful, transformative energy. You absorbed these distortions without knowing it. You internalized shame as morality. You confused silence with safety. But repression does not protect you, it divides you. And every time you feel desire and then judge yourself for it, you reinforce that division. You feed the illusion that there is something wrong with you, that your body is a threat, that your longing is a flaw. And slowly, over time, you begin to disappear beneath layers of false identity. It is time to stop punishing yourself for what you were taught to fear. It is time to reclaim the innocence of your instincts, not as an act of indulgence, but as an act of healing. To look at yourself with compassion and say, I was taught to feel shame, but I will no longer carry it. To realize that many of your so-called sins were never yours to begin with. They were inherited beliefs, They were projections of other people's unresolved pain. Your sexuality is not something to be managed. It is something to be understood. And that understanding begins by removing the lens of judgment. Not everything that feels strong is dangerous. Not everything that is hidden is bad. Sometimes what we fear the most is simply the part of us that wants to come alive again. When you were conditioned to feel shame for your natural desires, you were not just cut off from pleasure, you were cut off from your vitality, your truth, your capacity to be fully human. And to heal that, you must go back to the place where the conditioning began. You must meet the younger version of yourself and whisper to them what no one else had the courage to say. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not bad. You were always whole. This is the beginning of your return. There is a mistake many people make when it comes to their darker impulses. They believe that if they ignore them, if they lock them away deep enough, those impulses will simply vanish. But the unconscious does not work like that. What you repress does not dissolve. It waits. It waits for a moment of weakness, a moment of emotional collapse, or an unguarded state. Then it emerges, not gently, not with your permission, but with force. This is the truth about your sexual shadow. It will find a way to express itself, and if you refuse to face it consciously, it will show up through sabotage. You may think you're in control, living a balanced, respectable life, but beneath the surface the shadow is still active. It whispers in fantasies you never speak of. It nudges you toward people you know aren't good for you. It sabotages your intimacy because it doesn't want to be seen. And you don't know why you're attracted to chaos, why you destroy relationships right when they become real, why you feel guilty for even having desire. But you see, the shadow always has a language. It speaks in pattern, in pain, in repetition. You will find it in the moments you feel drawn to someone not for who they are, but for what they awaken in you. You will feel it in the secrecy of your behaviors, in the places where your pleasure is mixed with guilt, in the recurring emotional dramas that feel strangely familiar. These aren't coincidences. They are the shadow's signature. The unintegrated sexual self doesn't simply stay quiet. It demands to be heard. And if you refuse to listen, it will raise its voice. It might emerge as addiction, not just to sex, but to attention, to validation, to fantasy. It might show up in sudden emotional outbursts, in irrational jealousy, in compulsive behaviors that make you feel ashamed afterwards. Or it might manifest more subtly, in the quiet emptiness you feel after meaningless encounters, in the way you feel unseen even in supposedly intimate relationships. These are not random failures. They are expressions of a deeper, ignored truth trying to break through. There's something profound happening when you are drawn again and again to what wounds you. The unconscious is trying to make the invisible visible. The psyche wants to be whole, and it will keep creating situations that mirror the parts of yourself you refuse to face until you finally stop running and turn inward. This is why doing the work consciously is so important. To sit with your desires, not to act on all of them, not to judge them, but to understand them. To ask them, where did you come from? What are you trying to show me? When you face the sexual shadow with awareness, something miraculous happens. The chaos begins to calm. The compulsions loosen their grip. The energy that was once fragmented begins to return to you as clarity, as strength. But this takes courage, because the shadow is not neat. It is not comfortable. It will confront you with the truth about who you've been and what you've avoided. It will ask you to feel what you've long buried: shame, grief, longing, confusion. And yet this is how healing begins. Not by pretending those feelings aren't there, but by allowing them to move through you. This is not a punishment, it is a path. You are not being haunted, you are being called back to yourself. Every part of you that sabotages your joy is also a part that wants your attention, not to destroy you, but to be welcomed home. The sexual shadow becomes dangerous only when you refuse to look at it. But when you bring it into the light of awareness, you see it for what it truly is. Not a monster, but a messenger. A signal from the depths of your being that you are ready to become whole. It will emerge one way or another. The choice is never about whether you have a shadow. The choice is how you choose to meet it. In silence and fear, or in awareness and truth. This is the only way the sabotage ends. There's a truth few are willing to see, that sexual desire is not only about the body. It is not merely a drive to be satisfied or an instinct to be controlled. At its core, it is symbolic. It is the soul reaching for something it has lost, something it has forgotten. The erotic, in its deepest sense, is the language of the unconscious, a mirror held up to the inner life of the individual, reflecting not just longing for another, but longing for the parts of oneself that were abandoned along the way. This is why desire so often confuses and overwhelms us. Because we believe it is about the person standing in front of us, about attraction, about lust, about the surface. But in truth, the people we are magnetically drawn to often reflect something within us that wants to be reclaimed, a part of our inner world that has been pushed down, denied, or left in shadow. It might be our boldness, our sensuality, our wildness, our vulnerability, qualities we have exiled in order to survive in a world that demanded control and conformity. When you feel drawn to someone with a mysterious intensity, that pull is not random. It is not just chemistry. It is the psyche saying, this is a reflection of something you need to see. And sometimes what we are most drawn to is not because it completes us, but because it reveals us. The erotic shows us where we are fragmented. It shows us where we are yearning to return to wholeness. This is why sexuality, when left unexplored, becomes confusing. You may find yourself obsessing over someone who awakens something you thought you had buried. You may not even like them consciously, but something deeper responds. It's because the soul doesn't care about logic. It only wants to be made whole again. It uses symbols, people, desires, fantasies, to guide you to the places in your psyche that have been lost or rejected. To understand your sexual shadow, you must begin to see your desire not as something to resist or blindly follow, but as something to interpret. Each fantasy contains a symbol. Each attraction contains a lesson. They are messages from within, cloaked in the language of emotion and sensation. You must ask yourself, what is this person awakening in me? What do I feel in their presence that I cannot feel on my own? Is it my freedom, my rage, my vulnerability, my buried sensuality? And then the real work begins, not in possessing that person, but in reclaiming that part of yourself. The many chase partners, believing they are seeking love, but what they are really seeking is themselves. They confuse union with another for union with their own soul. They use the body of the other as a mirror, but forget to look into the reflection. And this is why relationships so often turn painful, because when the illusion of completion fades, the original wound reappears. The shadow returns, and the longing grows louder. But when you begin to see sexual desire as the soul's longing for wholeness, you are no longer enslaved by it. You can look at it with reverence, with curiosity, with responsibility. You can ask, what is this longing trying to show me? And instead of reaching outward, you begin to turn inward. You begin to gather the lost pieces of yourself. Desire becomes not a trap, but a teacher. And this changes everything. Because you stop searching for someone to fix you. You stop chasing situations that recreate your wounding. Instead, you begin to integrate. You begin to feel desire without shame, without fear, without the compulsion to act or the guilt to suppress. You begin to hold it like a flame in your hands, not to burn yourself or another, but to light the path home. This is the deeper truth of the erotic. It is not chaos, it is guidance. It is the soul calling out through the language of the body, through the ache of longing, saying, "There is more of you to be found. Come closer." And if you dare to listen, you'll find that every desire carries within it a piece of your becoming. There is a silent agreement most people live under, a belief passed down from generation to generation without question, that sexuality belongs in the shadows, that desire must be hidden, that certain thoughts and feelings should never be spoken aloud, not because they are untrue, but because they make others uncomfortable. And so, what should have been a sacred part of your inner life becomes something secretive, fragmented, and even shameful. But the soul does not thrive in secrecy. What is hidden in shame does not disappear, it festers, it grows distorted, and eventually it demands to be seen. The danger is not in having a sexual shadow, the danger is in pretending it doesn't exist. Because the more you repress your instincts, the more they begin to rule you from beneath the surface, and not with clarity, but with confusion. You become uncertain about your own intentions. You second-guess what you want. You question your worth, your boundaries, your desires. And the irony is, the very thing you think you are hiding ends up controlling you more than if you had faced it. When sexuality is buried in silence, it becomes reactive. It finds indirect ways to assert itself, through obsession, through rebellion, through withdrawal, through manipulation. It plays out in fantasies you don't understand, in relationships you can't fully commit to, in decisions you later regret. You are not making these choices freely. You are acting out a script that was written in the dark, shaped by voices that were never yours to begin with. That is the cost of suppression. When you exile a part of yourself, you don't just lose access to its darkness, you lose its light as well. You lose the vitality, the joy, the creativity, the sense of connection that comes when you are truly embodied and alive. You start living as a fraction of yourself, thinking that's what maturity or morality looks like. But self-denial is not wisdom, it is fear dressed up as discipline. To truly integrate your sexual shadow, you must create a space within yourself where nothing is forbidden, not because you act on every impulse, but because you're willing to feel them, examine them, and understand them without judgment. That inner space must be larger than your fear. It must be wider than your conditioning. Only then can you begin to bring what was unconscious into the light of awareness. The work is not to become someone else. The work is to become more of who you are. And to do that, you must sit with the parts of you that were once silenced. You must listen to the voice that whispers in the dark. You must ask, what did I have to suppress to be accepted? What parts of me were too much for the people around me to handle? And am I still carrying their shame as if it were my own? Because often, the shame we feel around our sexual energy is not truly ours. It is the residue of collective fear, passed down from cultures that feared the body, from religions that mistrusted the feminine, from families that did not know how to hold intimacy without control. You inherited this shame like a burden, and now it is time to lay it down. You do not need to be healed from your sexuality. You need to be freed into it, not into the chaos of compulsion, but into the quiet power of presence, into the stillness of knowing that your desire is not your enemy, it is your compass. It is not a flaw to fix. It is a language you must learn to speak with care, with reverence, with honesty. And when you begin to honor your own inner world like this, something extraordinary happens. You begin to attract different experiences. Not because you've mastered some external technique, but because your inner reality has shifted. You're no longer seeking from lack. You're no longer hiding in shame. You are simply showing up as someone who is whole, aware, and unafraid of their depth. This is what it means to integrate the shadow, not to remove the darkness, but to make room for it in the light. There comes a moment, often after years of confusion or inner conflict, when something inside you begins to stir, a quiet recognition that the patterns you've been living are not accidents. The way you feel around intimacy, the walls you put up in relationships, the impulses you fight, the guilt that follows desire, they are not random. They are parts of a deeper truth you have not yet faced. And no matter how much you distract yourself, avoid confrontation, or try to fix things at the surface, the feeling persists. A restless whisper from within, asking you to finally look. But to truly see the shadow, especially the sexual shadow, is not to analyze it or judge it from a distance. It is to enter into a deeper kind of presence with yourself, one that does not divide you into good and bad, light and dark, pure and impure. That presence is not just intellectual. It is a quality of awareness that is felt, embodied, non-reactive. It is a state of being in which you are no longer trying to escape what arises within you, but instead making space. And when you do that, when you begin to listen to your desire without instantly attaching shame or urgency, what emerges is not chaos. What emerges is clarity. Because the shadow is not trying to ruin your life, it is trying to get your attention. It is the part of you that was silenced when you were told that love must be earned, that desire is dangerous, or that you must become someone more acceptable to be worthy of connection. But the soul has never accepted those conditions. It has always remembered the truth. And so the shadow forms not as punishment, but as a rebellion against the lie. It waits in the dark corners of your life, stirring the same emotions again and again, not because it wants to trap you, but because it wants to free you. It wants you to finally turn inward and remember what you are. And what you are is not shameful. This is the beginning of real transformation, not by conquering the shadow, but by turning toward it with maturity and humility. You stop asking, "How do I get rid of this part of me?" and you begin asking, "What is this part of me trying to reveal?" That shift changes everything, because it invites integration instead of rejection, wholeness instead of performance. In the beginning, this may be disorienting because you will have to confront many ideas you inherited from others, ideas that were useful for controlling behavior but destructive for your self-worth. You may feel grief, anger, even betrayal when you realize how long you lived in fear of your own aliveness. But grief is not a step backward. It is a sign that something real is being unearthed. It means you are touching the place where healing becomes possible. The sexual shadow does not ask for indulgence nor for denial. It asks for truth. It asks you to be honest about what you feel, what you fear, what you've suppressed. It asks you to tell yourself the stories you've never had the courage to admit, to say, "Yes, I wanted that. Yes, I was afraid. Yes, I acted out. Yes, I felt ashamed. And still, I am worthy of compassion." Only through this kind of honesty can the shadow begin to soften. Because it no longer needs to shout. It no longer needs to hide. It has finally been seen. And when the shadow is seen, not as the enemy, but as the part of you that stayed behind during your fragmentation, then healing is not a task, it is a return. There is no need to fear the truth of who you are. There is no need to punish yourself for being human. Your desire is not your failure, it is your teacher. Your shame is not your identity, it is a signal. And your shadow is not your curse, it is your invitation. This is the moment you stop running. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore more videos just like this. Thank you.